Hello, everyone. Hello, 8th through 12th grade. It is so wonderful to be here together tonight. We have a really special guest tonight. Fred Guttenberg is with us. He's the author of the book, Find the Helpers, which Rev Jen will let you know if you want the book. We have books for you. As we go through, don't forget about the chat. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat for Fred, send it to me, send it to Rev Jen, any one of your rabbis. So we are so thrilled to have you, Fred, and you've come here to talk about your experience with your daughter, Jamie, being murdered at Parkland High School. Today's February 8th, and that happened February 14th. So there's a tradition to dedicate a study session or a gathering to someone. And so I would like to dedicate this gathering in Jamie's memory as we approach her yahrzeit. So let me introduce you really quick and then we can get into it.
Sure.
Fred Guttenberg began his public life after the murder of his beautiful 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, in the Parkland High School shooting on February 14th, 2018. The day after the murder, Fred decided to attend a public vigil in Parkland. While there, the mayor asked him to speak. His words shook a nation, and he has not stopped since. And we'll get back to that when we talk. Only 4 months prior to the murder of his daughter, Fred's brother Michael passed away from cancer related to his service from 9/11. He was one of the original first responders in the World Trade Center with a team of doctors who got trapped in the World Trade Center as it collapsed. Amazingly, the room they were in did not collapse. They spent 16 days at ground zero. So following his involvement in these two American tragedies, Fred has traveled the country talking about both events, about perspective, perseverance, and resilience. He discusses the pivotal moments in his life and how we respond to that moment. So Fred and his wife, Jennifer, live in Florida, and their son, Jesse, is in college, right? Jesse's in college?
Yes.
Yeah, Jesse's in college. And he created the nonprofit Orange Ribbons for Jamie, which I'm really excited for him to tell you about. I think you will all really identify with Jamie and what she was passionate about. But as we begin, Fred, we're talking about the murder of your daughter in a mass shooting in a high school. And yet, your book is called Find the Helpers. How is that even possible?
Thank you for asking. And thank you for having me. Because no disrespect to all the adults on this call, I really do love talking to the kids. When we were planning Jamie's funeral, still hard to believe it's going to be 3 years at the end of this week. The funeral director handed me a journal, and he said, "Have you ever journaled before?" And I said, "No, I have not." And I really am not someone who's did a lot of writing, and my niece Allie's on here. She knows I would do this stupid stuff on Facebook and that kind of thing. I wasn't even on Twitter at the time. Writing, was just something I did just to kind of connect with people in a happy way. So he handed me this journal, and I took it home, and not immediately, but soon after, I started writing a lot. And I started putting down my thoughts, and I started utilizing the journal and other forms of writing. In around April of 2018, I said to my wife, I want to write a book. I want to tell our family's story of being a part of two American tragedies and how the country has responded differently to both. Now, the original intent was to tell that story, which, by the way, I still do tell in this book. But I shared the original version of what I wrote with somebody who I trust very deeply. And he just handed back the manuscript, and he said, "You're not done writing. You need to go back." I was exhausted from writing, and I just said, "What do you mean?" And he said to me, he goes, "The part of your book," he goes, "everyone knows your story already. You've been out there. You've already written op-eds. You've been on media. The part that really intrigued me that I didn't know was all of these moments with other people. And I want to know more of that." So I went back and I started trying to build out the facts around these stories with other people, things that happened. And shortly into writing it, it became clear to me that the way I've always looked at my life as an adult or even as a kid was about to change. Because I always looked at everything as about what I did. I never really looked at how much other people mattered to what I did. And as I'm rewriting this book, I'm realizing I don't get through anything without other people being a part of it, without other people, maybe before this happened with my brother and my daughter, they would coach me through things. They would advise me through things, but nothing happened alone. And then for sure, after my brother and my daughter, they literally carried me through things. They held me up when I couldn't hold myself. And my entire view of my life changed. It was all of a sudden, I felt hopeful because of how many people I was fortunate to have in my life. And, growing up, an older guy like me, a show that I watched a lot was Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. And he had become famous for a lot of quotes. One of them was a quote about helpers and hope. And in essence, what he said was, my mother always said to me, whenever there's tragedies happening in the world and terrible things, always look to the helpers, the policemen, the firemen, the doctors. And to that, I would add your neighbors, your community, the teachers. But as long as there are helpers, there is hope. That summed up how I was feeling as I was rewriting my book. And I ended up naming it Find the Helpers as a result. And in fact, that quote opens my book. The other thing that rewriting my book ended up doing for me is I was able to actually have other really important things happen that got included. One was the presidential election process and my endorsement of our now president, Joe Biden. And in fact, the phone call that he made to me, everyone knew the story of the earlier phone calls after Jamie was killed, but he also called me last February 14th, and I was able to talk about that. I also was able to talk about things like the last State of the Union, where I let my emotions get to me, and I stood up and challenged our president in the middle of the State of the Union and got detained and handcuffed, which was quite an experience. But it ended with helpers that night. And I don't get through that night the way I did without helpers, some of whom are very familiar to all of you, like Speaker Pelosi. So the story of helpers, those who are my everyday family and friends or people who I've gotten to know because of what happened, nothing goes forward without them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fantastic because we all need helpers, whether we want the help or not. There are times, like you said, people literally have to physically hold us up.
Yeah. And I am fortunate to have had people who carried me, sometimes literally from moment to moment, and I want to actually talk about something else from the book just to kind of get this conversation going, because it's really important for me to tell this to the kids, because one of the things that has also changed for me is the importance of perspective and moments in life, because we all have moments in life, moments that we will look back on and say, oh, that was the worst moment ever. Maybe, and I'm talking to a lot of kids now, maybe it was something with a relationship or something with an exam at school, but moments where we all look and say, oh, that was the worst thing ever. And a week later, you honestly don't remember what it was. But the reality is, in life, sometimes we have other moments that are just bigger. They may be really tragic, like the moments that I write about in my book. They may be really joyous. You get married, you have a baby, you fall in love, but they're bigger. And I want everyone on this call to look at my story and what I've gone through and embrace this message on perspective. Because when you have perspective, you can really find balance. And what I want to do is actually read the very last paragraph of my book because I wrote it to the kids. In fact, I would even say the ending of the book and the last chapter is very much directed at the kids. But the last paragraph says this: to anyone who reads this book, especially the kids and the young adults, and to our future heroes and leaders, you will have many moments in your life, some bigger than others. Ultimately, what matters more than the moment is how you respond to it. How you react to your moment when it comes will define you. If I can encourage every younger person on this call to embrace the idea that no matter what happens, what ultimately matters more is what you did next. You will find moments in your life that will shape you, that will propel you, and I hope you can embrace that message. So I wanted to share that to kind of get this all started, and then I'm free to take every one of your questions.
Well, thank you. I think we would love to hear about Jamie. Tell us about Jamie.
Yeah. Jamie was my beautiful little dancer. She was somebody who loved to dance, lived to dance. When she wasn't in school or doing other things, she was dancing. She was getting training. She'd come home, she'd tell us how exhausted she was, and then you'd turn around 5 minutes later, she was dancing around the house again. That's what she loved to do. And I think it's what a lot of people know about Jamie. But she also was a person who had the most amazing compassion for others. My daughter hated bullies. And she would be in school and she would put herself, if she saw someone being bullied, and she was a petite little thing, she would put herself between the person being bullied and the bully to make it stop, because she always wanted people to be treated well. She dedicated her time to volunteering for kids with special needs because she thought everyone should be treated well. And again, my niece is here on this call. She'll understand this. My daughter was the voice in every room she was ever in. She was the energy in every room she was ever in. You were either laughing because of her because she knew how to be funny and silly. And yes, at times you were also yelling because of her, because she also was incredibly stubborn and determined to get her point across. But you were always responding to her. The world lost somebody that was destined to do amazing things. And now, in Jamie's honor and memory, that's what we're going to do.
Absolutely. So the morning of the shooting, you describe in your book that it was a normal day with two teens who had to get out of the house and parents had to do work and do their thing. And it was kind of a rushed morning. So can you kind of take us through that day?
Yeah. The way to describe that morning is perfectly normal, with an exception. The day before I started planning for this Valentine's Day, this was the Valentine's Day where I wanted to introduce my 14-year-old daughter and my 16-year-old son to the romance of Valentine's Day. And my wife and I, our wedding video was on a VHS tape. We never converted it. We didn't really have a VHS recorder, so we hadn't watched it in forever. And on the 13th, February 13th, I bought equipment that I would use to digitize that video. I was doing it on my own. And I finished it, but I had editing to do. So on the morning of the 14th, I needed to get my kids out of the house to finish this, because I wanted us that night after school to all sit as a family and watch the video. So the morning of the 14th starts, like I said, any normal day. I have two dogs. They were barking. They needed attention. My wife and I had the things we needed to do. And my kids, being like two siblings, were running late, blaming each other. And which is fine because they always get out the door anyway and life moves on. However, I knew they were running late. So I was being dad and I was rushing them out the door. I was telling them, you got to go, you got to go, you got to get to school. And I was rushing them, never expecting what would happen that day. What I didn't say the very last time I saw my daughter or to my son that morning was, I love you. It was because I was rushing them out the door. And I will tell all of you kids, if your parents want to hold you tighter one day because they just need to, let them. They love you. And don't ever, ever miss the chance to the adults on this call to say it as if it could be that last moment, because you just never know. Always treat people as if that is a reality and as if you just want them to know it that desperately. I didn't that morning, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. The rest of the day went on. It was a normal day, the normal texting with the kids. I often joke that if my daughter's shoelace got untied, she would have texted my wife to tell her, because they just were constantly communicating. And it was all the normal stuff until just a few minutes after 2 p.m. When my son called me, and he's a jokester, and he says, Dad. And I said, what? And he goes, Dad. And I said, what? He goes, there's a shooting at my school. And at first, I didn't know if I should take him seriously until he said, and I can't find Jamie, because he watches after his sister like a hawk. For all the typical sibling stuff, he took care of his sister. He made sure nothing ever happened to her. Her safety was the most important thing to him. And I knew as soon as he said that, because he would never mess with her safety in a joke, I just said to him, where are you? And he said, I'm running with everybody else, but I need to go back. I can't find Jamie. I said, no, you don't. If there's a shooting, you need to keep running. And as we're on the phone together, he's telling me how he's hearing more shots. And those were the ones coming from the third floor that were most likely killing his sister. And I tell him, you keep running, you keep running, you keep running. And eventually he made it off the school campus to a Walmart where I met him. And he did the find my iPhone thing. Now I knew Jamie's phone was still in the building. I didn't know if Jamie was with her phone, but I knew it was in the building. And so my wife at that time was actually on lockdown in another school near the high school. She's a pediatric occupational therapist. When she got released from lockdown, knowing that Jamie's phone was in the building, and over time, all of her friends had called their parents. So it wasn't, we were hoping she would have used somebody else's phone at some point. When that didn't happen, my wife and I decided to go to the hospital. We waited there for a period of time. She wasn't there. They checked all the other hospitals. She wasn't there. And we decided to leave. One of my very best friends is law enforcement. He went back to the school to look around, and he found and identified my daughter. She became the first publicly identified because of that. And my life has now become one of doing something about what happened to her that day, because for all you parents on this Zoom and for all of you kids on this Zoom, your lives are worth it, and we need to do better.
So I know that your friend didn't want to tell you about Jamie because you were driving and your wife was in front of you. You weren't even in the same car.
No, we had come from two separate locations. And so he called me and he said, why don't you meet me at the Marriott Hotel where the police were doing all the staging? And I just said, I don't want to go there. I want to go home. And he kept on trying to talk me into meeting him there. And I just finally said, you know something. You need to tell me. And he broke down crying on the phone, and he said, she's gone. And then I'm on the phone talking to him, and my wife is in her car ahead of me, looking in her rearview mirror, and she can see that I'm getting emotional in my car. So she calls, and she wants to know who I'm talking to and what it's about. And now I didn't want to get her concerned because she was driving. So I'm trying to tell her the same thing that my friend was telling me, which is, oh, we're going to go meet at the hotel. Because I didn't want her to react to anything. But she's very persistent. She had her mother's instinct. And like I said to my friend, she said to me, she's like, you know something. And I just said, pull over. And on the side of the road is where I had to tell her what had happened to our daughter. Yeah, the rest is history.
In your book, you kind of talk about like not even being able to wrap your head around the idea that a mass shooting happened. And there was almost like no time for that, because then you were shifting into the vigil and the funeral. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, listen, the first 24 hours, there's parts of it that I remember in such fine detail, it's like they just happened. But there's a big part of that 24 hours that is a complete blur. Like people tell me things about having seen me or what I said, and I don't recall. One of the things that I don't recall from the first 24 hours is really grasping what it was that caused this.
Right.
Maybe I was in a little bit of shock. And while I knew it was gun violence, it didn't really hit me in the gut just yet until the night of the vigil, which was just the day later, February 15th. I went to the Parkland vigil, and when I got there, the mayor asked if I wanted to speak. And just said, sure. I hadn't prepared anything, but I decided I'll say something. And I went up on the stage, and there were thousands of people there carrying candles, and they were all crying. And I look out at this, and it was right there in that moment where it hit me in the gut. It finally registered what was happening here. And I started talking to everybody about what had just happened to my family, to our community. I talked about how I felt completely broken. I talked about not telling Jamie I loved her and how important it was for everyone in that crowd to never, ever, ever forget to tell that to the people you love. And I remember ending the night saying, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Along the drive home, I was processing all this, and I walked in my door, and I just said to everybody, I am going to break that effing gun lobby. And I didn't know exactly what that meant or how I was going to do it, but I knew that as a dad was what I was intending to do. I did blame them. I blamed them for holding our legislators hostage. And I just kept on saying it as often as I could. I'm going to break that effing gun lobby and going after their money. And I started doing that. That combined with some connections because of the business community. I think everyone knows the story with Dick's Sporting Goods, very quickly taking some bold steps. Well, their VP of marketing was a friend of mine. And so they had a personal connection to what happened. So very quickly, I started in this process with media, with the business community, and only 3 weeks later in Washington, D.C., working on change. And very quickly ended up touring this country, going around with candidates, working to fire certain people who were in office and elect others who weren't yet, in order to do something about our public safety. And we are winning this.
But I think it's important to remember in our conversation yesterday with a different group, this is not about taking guns out
No,
of people's hands. You are not against gun
no.
ownership. This is about assault rifles that do mass casualty events.
So and I'm glad you asked me that. This is not about legal, lawful gun owners. This isn't about people showing up at everybody's homes and removing all their weapons. The truth is, gun safety is not even a Second Amendment argument, even though the gun lobby wants to make it that. Um, Gun violence is nonpartisan. Bullets don't ask after they come out of a gun. I wonder if this is a Democrat or a Republican that I'm about to kill. If they hit you, they're going to kill you. And in the case of the school shooting that my daughter was part of, there were families, both Republicans and Democrats, affected. So it's a nonpartisan issue. But the response often is what I tell everybody, doesn't matter what party you're part of, this is not a Second Amendment issue. This is a public health issue. We have 40,000 people per year right now dying of gun violence, over 100,000 per year injured because of gun violence. And as a country, we have to figure out ways that we together, both gun owners and non-gun owners, work together to decrease the gun violence death rate, to decrease the incidence of gun violence and the severity of gun violence when it does happen. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things we can do. And we're going to start. This country is divided over parts of what should be done. But we passed gun safety legislation in Florida 3 weeks after Parkland happened. Red flag laws,
right?
Which are in some states are known as extreme risk protection orders. We raised the age for purchase to 21. We put in a 3-day waiting period. We did a lot of good stuff. There's not a single legal lawful gun owner in Florida who ever thinks about the laws that we passed because there's no effect on them.
Right. So I want to take you back, being that we're in a Jewish group. I want to talk about her funeral. You gave a eulogy. I will never know how you did that. And you're close with your rabbi. How did Jewish tradition and ritual help you through this?
So I was raised as a Jewish person. In a conservative temple as an adult. I was more, in the Reform temples, but Judaism was a part of my life every day. And the values that I was raised with come from that Jewish background. The commitment to others that I have, that really does come from that Jewish background. The ability to understand what was going to happen next through a grieving process. Some of that came from that Jewish background. Some of it came from, just really helpful advice from others. But my Judaism was extremely important in terms of defining who I am growing up and as an adult. Mm-hmm. We also talked yesterday because I really have to divide this. There's my Judaism, the traditions, the culture, who I am, and then there's faith. And because of what happened, my faith, my belief in a higher power has been shattered. And the crazy thing is, I as a person, I feel like my faith actually is stronger than ever, but it's in the people around me. I have such faith in the people around me beyond what I ever did, but I struggle, and we talked about this yesterday, when my brother was in hospice. I'll never forget the rabbi, my brother's rabbi from New York, coming in to talk to us and asking the family how we were doing. And I told him I was angry. My brother was a 50-year-old man who spent his entire life responding for others, taking care of others. And it was finally at that point in his life where his career was on a slingshot. He was doing great. He was going to be, becoming a national speaker. He wanted to travel where he could really start living life for him. He was single, he didn't have kids, and he really just had these ambitions of now being able to do other things. And then he got hit with the cancer that came from his service in 9/11. Because for those who are on this Zoom and don't know it, 4 months before my daughter was murdered, my brother died of cancer related to the fact that he ran the triage with about 10 other doctors at the World Trade Center on 9/11. So I was angry because of what was happening to him. And I told that to the rabbi. And he spoke to me about God's plan and how my brother is someone, and this is true, who did more in 50 years than most people will in 100. And that he was needed elsewhere, there was more for him to do elsewhere. And by the end of this conversation, I actually felt peace and I felt okay about it until 4 months later when my daughter was killed. And I've not been able to reconcile it. I've not been able, and this is me personally. I've not been able to find that place that has yet brought me back to a deep connection with a higher power. Mm-hmm. I still have it with my Judaism. Mm-hmm. Faith, it's more grounded, mm-hmm. but I'm struggling with the higher power.
Mm-hmm. I think that the struggle is real, right? And as Jews, that's what we're supposed to do. And so when a teen comes to me or a person comes to me and they're saying just that, I can't do it anymore. I can't. Look at what's happened. I always say, keep fighting, scream, throw God out the door for a while, but, keep that fight. I'm so glad that Rabbi gave you comfort. You were mentioning that your rabbi really helped you through the funeral process and Jewish ritual as well.
No, listen, he did. My wife and I, he was there for us nonstop. He was by our side through the planning process for the funeral. He was there at the service. And again, I'll say it again, my niece is on. She'll remember he was crying up there with us and for us. He knew my daughter. He knows my family. He said something at the funeral that has there have been several pieces of advice that have formed who I've been since, but one of them came from something he said at the funeral, which is we don't move on, we move forward. Mm-hmm. And that's what life is. I've been on this never-ending journey of moving forward, of to what I call our new normal, finding a new path. Life isn't always, peachy keen and perfection, mm-hmm. but we have to keep going forward. Mm-hmm. And I'll just never forget him saying at the funeral and then having this opportunity to talk more deeply with him about it. Mm-hmm. He is a mensch of a man, and we truly do love him. He's a wonderful guy.
I'm so glad you have that relationship. That is, as clergy, that's what we work for. That's what we want. So you said in the book, and you've said in other speeches, that you felt that not for 1 second were you doing anything without Jamie, and you felt you had your brother on one shoulder and your daughter on the other. And now you have this incredible orange ribbons for Jamie, and I want everyone to know how cool this foundation is.
Listen, Jamie is with me every second of every minute of every day. Jamie and Michael were the two toughest people that I'll ever know. Mm-hmm. Michael ran into the kinds of things that people like me would be running away from. For example, 2 planes in the World Trade Center. He fought his cancer heroically, and truly just the toughest person I'll ever know. And my daughter was born with that gene. The things that she did and her ability to stand up for other kids, no matter what, is always going to inspire me. And she knew right from wrong. And so when I go forward now, doing what I do, taking on our elected leaders, sometimes maybe pushing it a little too far, but it's because of how important this is to me. I always know they're standing on my shoulders, and they're telling me to fight.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling me, listen, I'll take a step back. I always say to my kids, and I say a plural, always do what's right, not what's easy. And I know they're standing there on my shoulders saying, what you're doing is right.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing it. And without a doubt, I do get signs. Some of you on here may have read the book already, but the first sign that I got that just told me I have to keep doing this happened on the very first morning of my very first visit to Washington, D.C. I was walking into one of the congressional buildings that actually Congressman Ted Deutsch's office is in, because he was going to lend me one of his staff members that was going to walk me all over every place that day, because I didn't know my way around. And Jamie and Jesse, who's my son, they both, doesn't matter what kind of code I put into my cell phone to keep them out of it, they'll figure it out in no time. That's just the way it is. And Jamie once got into my phone, and on random days throughout my calendar, she put this thing in there called Love Jamie Day. And Love Jamie Day is like Valentine's Day on steroids. And what would happen is I would get these calendar reminders when Love Jamie Day would come up. And as soon as it happened, I would text Jamie. She would typically be in school, and she would send me back, some kind of a happy text. But that day, I had to treat her like it was a Valentine's Day on steroids. It was Love Jamie Day. So I get to Washington, D.C. this day, and I'm walking into the building to start my day, and my phone buzzes, and I look at it, and it's a calendar reminder.
Oh my God.
And I sit down on the steps of this building. I think we're all probably very familiar now with Washington, D.C. and what it looks like more than we ever were because of January 6th. But there's a lot of steps. And I just sit down on the steps walking to this building, and I cry. I fall apart. I start crying. And I'm having a hard time figuring out how I'm going to pull myself together until it hit me. She just sent me a message. She just sent me a message, and she was telling me she was with me.
Yeah.
And I pulled myself together, and I got up, and I walked into the building, and I started challenging every one of these people that I could to do better.
So Rabbi Josh just put in the chat, and I want to make sure we talk about orange ribbons for Jamie, but it's a good question. Rabbi Josh asked, what can we do here in Michigan to help, lessen gun violence?
No, listen, that is a great question. And I will tell, and I'm going to answer it as if age is irrelevant to the answer, because what our kids have shown us is that they're ready to fight for their safety as well. And not maybe more heroically, they are doing it more heroically than the adults.
Mm-hmm.
Use your voice is the simplest way for me to answer that question. Don't ever think you should not tell people how you're feeling about what they're doing when it affects you, whether it be through social media or part of groups that are doing amazing things to push our elected leaders. Get involved. Whether getting involved means, again, using your social media platform or showing up at events when an elected person is having a town hall, for example. You show up. Those town halls, these elected people, they're used to 5 people showing up. Okay? They shouldn't be. They should have 500 showing up saying, you're doing your job or you're not doing your job, and here's why. So show up. Make sure your voices are heard. But the most important part of showing up has to do with voting. As Americans, we have done a terrible job of voting. And I don't mean we've elected the wrong people. That's part of it. But we've elected who we've elected because not enough of us have voted. We've done a terrible job of voting because not enough of us vote. And so show up, get out there, and make sure your voice is heard through your vote. To the young kids on this call who are 18 or over, don't you ever miss an election. And to the ones who are under 18, but they're close, the next election may happen and you'll be able to vote, and you got to make sure you do. So thank you for asking that.
I was telling Fred that when the Parkland kids organized the March for Our Lives, that our teens went to Reb Jen and said, we're going. And she took them. They flew out and they went. And I took 2 buses of people to Detroit. And again, I should have worn the sweatshirt. I had the sweatshirt. I don't know why I didn't wear it. And also after the Pittsburgh shooting, our teens again came to our clergy and said, let us do this. Let us create a vigil. And they did it better. I have no doubt that they did it better than we would have. Yeah.
Listen, that Pittsburgh shooting rocked me. And I'll never forget, I was traveling back from Washington, D.C. when the news of that hit. And I think we talked about it yesterday. I'm not sure if we did. I actually went to Pittsburgh at the 1-year remembrance with several of the other families from Parkland to go through that horrific weekend with them. And, we went to Temple with them. We went to the JCC. We toured the neighborhood. And, never at that moment, I had no idea that my book was going to be called Find the Helpers or have a connection to Mr. Rogers, but we actually went by his house, which is there. But we went there to help them get through grief. We were a year ahead of them. We've been through things that they haven't yet gone through. And so we went there to go through this weekend with them to make sure we were there to lift them, and in doing so, we were lifted as well. I mean, we were still grieving, but the ability to go be a part of their lives in that moment helped us. So it really gets to the point of this book, which is at the end of the day, this is not a book about gun violence or tragedy. It's a book about being there for one another. Just be present in somebody's life. Be there.
So now I want you to tell us about Orange Ribbons for Jamie.
Yeah. So orange was Jamie's favorite color. And the night she was killed, all of her dance sisters got together at the dance studio and made orange ribbons. And the day after, they came by our house wearing their orange ribbons, and they brought a whole bunch of them that they made for the family. And they marched up to her room and had a very emotional gathering in her room, crying, wearing their ribbons, and taking pictures. They posted the pictures, and immediately it went viral through the dance world. Dance studios and dance competitions around the country, and even in some cases around the world, were dedicating the rest of their season to Jamie and wearing orange ribbons everywhere. Broadway picked up on it, and in a matter of days, some of the shows dedicated their performances to Jamie, like Lion King and Hamilton, and they started wearing orange ribbons. I was wearing my orange ribbon every day, and about, 3 or 4 weeks later, I was in a Home Depot, and somebody asked me what it was for. And when I told them, they said, that's the color of the gun safety movement.
Yeah.
And I just said, it is? This was all new to me. And there was too deep a connection for me to ignore. So I went home and told my wife, and we decided that we were going to start the foundation that day called Orange Ribbons for Jamie. My initial intention for the foundation was just to make this the symbol of the gun safety movement. And it is now. But we also decided the foundation needed to be a foundation that would honor Jamie's life and the things that matter to Jamie in life, but also educate on why her life was cut short. So I think we all know about the, educating on the gun safety piece, but the part of the foundation that I think long-term for sure is more meaningful and that my wife has dedicated her time to is about honoring Jamie in life. It's about the anti-bullying programs. It's about giving back to these programs that help our kids with special needs. We're a dog-obsessed family, so it's about giving back to places like the Humane Society. It is about giving back to places that have dance programs and scholarships. But the thing we also started last year, and that I'm really actually most hopeful will ultimately be Jamie's legacy, is our scholarship program. Mm-hmm. And it's called Kids of All Abilities. And the reason it's called the Kids of All Abilities Scholarship is it's got three components. One is a student who's going to go to school to be a helper to others, whether it's a doctor or a therapist, but you're going to major in something where you're going to help others, but you have to also show you have community service, because Jamie did. And you also have to have a year of dance, because Jamie did. The other scholarship bucket is kids who are going to major in dance, but they have to have community service. And then the third bucket, and the reason why we call it the Kids of All Ability Scholarship, is we also offer a scholarship for kids who have special needs, who may not even go on to a traditional four-year college education, or maybe they will, but scholarship programs are not always designed to help those kids. Ours is. We want to make sure those kids are getting a scholarship as well. Listen, my daughter should be graduating this year. This should be the year where she's now deciding where she's going to go to school. And while that will never happen, the legacy of Janie will be that she will help other kids go to college. We're proud of that.
She's a helper. She's still a helper.
Forever.
So we do have a question in the chat. Oh, someone said they watched the Orange Ribbon Dancers while they were on a cruise ship, since they performed there. Well, that's so cool. We have a question. It says, with a Democratic president and Congress and the NRA in bankruptcy, do you think we can actually get an assault weapons ban passed?
So I'll answer this. We are going to get gun safety legislation passed. There will be a fairly comprehensive effort and result. Whether or not that includes an assault weapons ban is the part that I'm not certain of. I think ultimately you can get legislators on both sides to agree on a lot of things that will save lives, and that's a good thing. But you may not have the political will to do the assault weapons ban. I hope I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think you're seeing things happening in the country right now, which may be causing others who used to oppose it to pay attention. Mm-hmm. When Jamie was killed, the gun lobby, the legislators all used to say, assault weapons are used for hunting. They're used for sport. Now we see assault weapons being taken to rallies and government buildings to intimidate. And we've seen them being used in these rallies and at protests to kill. So they're no longer something that you can just say is, hunting and sport. And the risk of doing nothing on that has gone up. Mm-hmm. So it may be a harder fight. It may take longer, but that is my ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. On behalf of all the parents here, thank you. There's another question. Have you kept in touch with the young activists from Parkland and also Jamie's friends?
So I'll answer on Jamie's friends first. Excuse me. We have. They're amazing kids. They're still a part of our family. They actually help us with Orange Ribbons for Jamie, and they do a lot of volunteering. But we have absolutely stayed in touch with this amazing group of kids, which, and again, anyone who knows me knows I speak very truthfully. These kids, I could not be more proud and happy to watch them all have the milestones that they're supposed to be having right now. And at the same time, it breaks my heart because of the fact that my daughter isn't. And we know their families, and so they understand how all the mixed feelings that I have, but we have maintained those relationships. I love these kids. The kids from March for Our Lives and other kids who I've gotten to know around the country, I do stay in touch with many of them, and they are amazing kids. They've shown us how deeply they're willing to fight for their lives. They've shown us what leadership looks like. Many of them have also taken my advice and kind of moved on from the movement a little bit to go to school. Because if you want to be a future leader, if you want to do things in this country, you have to get that education. And so, you have the experience already. Now get your education. But I do stay connected with some of them. I do.
Yeah, the teens are going to save us. They are absolutely going to save us. I'm convinced.
I don't have my cell phone with me, but I just want to say something to the kids.
Yeah.
And I tell this to kids all over the country and their parents. I had it wrong. Okay. And so did all you other adults. So don't pretend you did. I thought this cell phone was destroying our kids. They're always in their cell phone, doing this. And we didn't think our kids knew how to communicate. And we were wrong. They do know how to communicate. They know what they want. They're fierce in going after what they want. And that cell phone, rather than destroying them, was actually their weapon. Because of that cell phone, they were able to strategize and organize in ways that we adults still haven't figured out how to keep up with. So I'm so proud of our kids, and I just hope they keep using their voice.
So speaking of teens, how is Jesse? How is your son?
You know what? He's an amazing kid. He's in school. He's in college now, a sophomore. And listen, this has been a struggle for him. We were a family of four, and we're not a family of four in a physical sense anymore. He heard it all. He feels like, to this day, he should have tried to do more. But in doing so, he would have put himself at risk. And I thank God every day that he didn't. But he is doing well. And together as a family, we keep on finding our way forward. Listen, I keep telling Jesse that what happened should not define who he is as an adult. It's always going to be part of his life story, but it shouldn't define the rest of his life. He should go forward. He should have this amazing life, doing amazing things and being happy. And as his dad, for those of you on this call, I'm 55, so don't try to do the math, but I always tell him, I plan on being around for at least another 50 years to harass him and make him crazy. And I intend to enjoy that. So I'm going to be okay.
I'm truly overwhelmed by your generosity of spirit, not only being so happy for the other teens. I understand also the feeling of being completely heartbroken, but you're saving Jesse's life in a way to tell him, don't let this define you. Go be happy, go find your happiness, go live a wonderful life. And it's just the generosity of spirit is just, it's incredible. It's incredible. I just want to look at, we just got a really big thing in the chat. You were at the Denver presentation, Denver.
I spoke there.
Well, one of our teens was here, Naomi, and she said, I went up to you in tears and told you I was a gun violence survivor. And that as a second grader, my dad pointed a gun at me, my mom, my brother for being Jewish. And
I
And
kind of remember that. Oh no.
yeah, and she said, since then, I've published my story with gun violence to every town survivor network, and it's got 90,000 views.
Good.
Amazing speeches and lobbies. Amazing. Naomi, you'll have to get in touch so you can reconnect with Fred.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Naomi.
Amazing. If anyone else have any questions before we wrap up? I'm trying to follow the chat. I don't think there are any. You know, my last question was, what would Jamie want our teens to know or to do or to hear, you know, as they, you know, become adults?
Always be good to others. Always be good to others, you know, and especially for younger people, that's not always the easiest thing to do because of different pressures. But always be good to others. Always be there for others.
I love that.
You know,
Be a helper.
that would be Jamie's advice.
Well, now our community will bring Jamie into our hearts, and her memory will be for a blessing at Temple Israel and in our communities. And I'm so glad now that everyone knows about the book and about Orange Ribbons for Jamie. And thank you so much. Fred came from Rep Jen. And thank you so much for talking to our teens tonight and our parents. We're just so grateful, so very grateful you shared your story.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing on the surprise guest, my niece. And, you know, I definitely am very thankful for that. Listen, I hope we stay in touch because you all are a wonderful group. So I do hope we stay in touch. I can't promise you I'm going to come to Michigan, but I have a feeling I could see you guys in Florida. So anytime, let me know.
We'll come in the summer. It's nice here.
Yeah, people are just filling the chat with thank you so much. You're amazing. We're so grateful to you. They're looking forward to reading your book. You know, we watch these things on the news, and to hear you talk and give us this personal connection, it changes everything. So thank you. Thank you. Please hang out for a second while the teens and parents leave so we can chat a little bit afterwards. They're still thanking you. They're busy thanking you in the chat. I hope you're watching.
So it looks like a great group of kids. I'm kind of looking at all the comments flashing up as they are coming. So
it's so nice. And again, these are 8th through 12th graders. So kind of right in the heart of where your story was taking place. And I think they need to hear your, oh, here's a parent inspiring how you turn your grief into action. And I told you yesterday, one of my favorite lines in the book was, grief had to merge with the goal. I love that. It was so moving. Grief had to merge with the goal.
Hey, that's part of going forward, or it was for me.
Yeah, I always say I don't move on, I move through as best I can. You know, I like the moving forward, moving through. So I like your rabbi. I don't know him, but listen, I like him.
It resonated with me. And then you combine that, which we didn't talk about on here, with what our now president said to me about mission and purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, it just, I have, my kids, they're sappy dad, but you know, I always say life doesn't have a rear view mirror. Mm-hmm. And so no matter what happens to you, you know, we have to find that path forward. We have to keep going forward. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the only way to pick myself up after what happened was to focus on doing something about what happened. And that's my path forward.
And you are. And if you read the book, everyone, you'll hear a lot about the beginnings of his journey against gun violence, and your families too, because your family, your sister Abby, with her letter, and your family kind of got involved with it also.
You wrote that letter on the plane down
the
next morning to Jamie's funeral.
Letter.
And listen, as a family, that letter was our first experience with this notion of going viral, you know, because we didn't really, like I said, I wasn't on Twitter then. Anyone who follows me knows I am now, and I'm very active on Twitter. But that's my voice. That's how I communicate, is through Twitter now. So yeah. Anyone who's if you're not following me, I fill it up. So,
Yes, you do. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. You're the voice for many of us. And, like I told you the other day, I heard a helicopter above my house, and my son's school is less than a mile from here. And I couldn't breathe because why is there a helicopter above my house? And shouldn't be that way. So you're fighting for all of our kids, and we need to join the fight. We need to use our voices. We need to join you and help you. Absolutely.
let's do it.
Let's do it. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Great to see
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
everybody. Beautiful stuff.
Bye, y'all.